5, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the second of our winter sessions of public theology held in association with Dún Laoghaire Methodist Church. And our title for the series is Ireland Beyond 2024. And it is a personal pleasure to introduce someone who really needs no introduction, Harold Good. We ran into some difficulties with our earlier plans for this evening, and Harold very kindly bailed us out at much shorter notice than he is usually given, and we're very grateful. Thank you, Harold. Now, sadly, most of our audiences and even some of our speakers have been, to put it kindly, getting on. It seemed therefore a good idea to get the views of younger people who will be inheriting what we have created. And we are delighted to have with us not just the younger generation, but for some of us, 2 generations younger. But we ought to know how they feel about Ireland's future. So, Harold, I pass this meeting over to you to introduce our speakers, outline the form of the evening, and then to be moderator of our discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Alan. Thank you for the welcome and the introduction. I only have myself to blame for being here, because I think it was at our last meeting that I looked around and I said, I think there's only one person that I could see who was under pension age. And we were talking about the future of this island, and you know, and we all agreed that we needed to have a conversation with people for whom this really would matter. We're not going to be, some of us, around that much longer. I speak of myself because I'm probably one of the oldest here. But it was a very, I was glad that people warmed to the idea of inviting some young people into the conversation. And I'm delighted that when I asked a couple of friends, could they suggest some bright, intelligent, thoughtful, open-minded young people, 2 names were given to me, and I'm going to introduce these 2 folks now. I'm going to let them say something about themselves, and then I've asked them to take 10 or 12 minutes to give us a personal reflection on their thoughts about the future, their hopes, their aspirations, their dreams, and perhaps their anxieties, their fears, as we look forward to the future for Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, the island of Ireland, however we like to think of it. It's their future. And as Alan has said, they've inherited from us good, bad, and indifferent. I think some of the things we've maybe passing on are quite good. Some of them are very indifferent, and some of them we hang our heads when we think about them. But let these young people speak for themselves. And first of all, Chloe, and again, we're sorry you're not feeling so good, but it's great that you're able to come on and join with us. Could you just, in a sentence or 2, say something about yourself? Then I'll ask Andrew to say something about himself. And then I'm going to ask you, Chloe, to give us your 10 or 12 minutes of your own thoughts.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Chloe, and I am from South Armagh. I am currently studying social policy and sociology at Queen's, and I am also a member of the Shared Island Youth Forum. So that's just a wee small sort of bit with me. I also do a wee bit of work with Redemptorist Youth Ministry Ireland and with YouthLink. So that's a small wee bit about me.
And Andrew.
Yeah, so hi everyone, it's lovely to speak with you this evening and speak about my anticipations and hopes for the future. As you know, I'm Andrew, and I'm from a little village in County Armagh called Loughgall. I'm a member of the Loughgall Presbyterian Church, and I serve at several youth organisations there. I'm slightly outnumbered tonight, I think, as a Presbyterian, but I hope you won't hold that against me when it comes to the questions. But I truly am a Christian, and I truly believe that God has a plan for my life, and I believe God will put me in a place where I can make a meaningful difference.
And you're presently studying at Queen's?
I'm presently studying at Queen's University doing law with politics.
Law and politics, so watch this space. Yeah, great. Look, Gaul, my mother's country. So I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I knew there was something decent about you, but I didn't realize that. It makes up for the Presbyterian bit. Chloe, can you share with us your thoughts, your aspirations, as a young person, what you look forward to this your island home?
Yeah, so I think sort of being on the shared island, I think that really sort of opened my eyes up to the whole sort of idea of what Ireland sort of future looks like. Because for me, I would be sort of much into the idea of unification for Ireland. That's what I believe. And I don't really think for me it's about this nationalist win and gain and things like that. I think that I come from a place now that it's an idea for young people and for young change makers to make something new of it. You know, I think, there's different opinions about the Good Friday Agreement, but for me, I think that that was one of the greatest things that the people on this island chose to do with each other. I think it was a real start for peace, and I feel like as young people, it's our legacy and our job, if we want to be change makers, to do something with it and to do something positive with it. So that's the sort of first thing I'll say. I also think from being from the border, being in a border county, that I can see this sort of different maybe meaning to the border. You know, I cross the border every day to go to Dundalk. You know, there's no real, it doesn't feel like I'm going into this different country sort of a thing. But what I do notice is that when I came to Belfast for university, that there was this divide that I'd never really felt before. It wasn't, it was nearly that border divide wasn't even a divide for me. It was actually the communities here that struck me more. And that's something that I think that always kind of was like, I don't think young people today should be feeling like that. I think that we're in a time and in a society where all that we want to do is create safe spaces and comfortable spaces for people, and that's how far we've come. And I think that Ireland now can create such a place for everybody here to feel comfortable, because I know what it's like to feel like I don't belong. And I don't mean that in a sense of identity as in Catholic or Protestant or nationalist or unionist. I mean that in school, I never really had a great time. I sort of, I got bullied. I didn't really feel like the education system was for me. And that's sort of a big thing if unity was to happen. That's one thing that I think I would hold massively is the education system. I think that we need a massive reform here. I think it's very unequal that a few minutes down the road, from me, you can see that there's a whole different education system. There's a whole different point system. There's a whole inequality in people from the north trying to get into universities from the south and vice versa. Like for me, it's not working. For healthcare, I don't think it's working. For employability, I don't think it's working. I mean, a lot of our young people from universities are moving to Australia, and there is a reason for that. So that's another point I'd like to make. I think another thing I would like to say is that, where will I go with this? I think there's also a very economical sense to this. I think, to be honest, prosperity and unity, I think we need to maybe take away the walls in our minds not just the physical ones, but the ones we maybe uphold, the stereotypes that we bring. I think that the younger generation is good at doing that, but it maybe for my parents, I would say, and from talking to my granny, I think that it sometimes can be hard to let go, because I mean, yous have the experience of living through the troubles. I am very glad that I don't, but I could never speak on your behalf or their behalf on what it was like. But I hope that sort of what I've said makes a wee bit of sense. I won't talk too much, but I hope that that was maybe a good ideal. But yeah, that's me. I don't think I have 10 minutes worth of talking. I think that I do so much talking about it. I think it just sort of reams off like that. I don't need to make it, complex, or, I don't need to make it a whole big conversation. I think that's what it is. I think that's what I'm happy enough to say. So thanks for listening to that anyway. I appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you.
That's a great start, Chloe. And I know that when we come to questions and conversation, you'll have a lot more to say. And thank you for that. A great start. So, Andrew, perhaps you could share where you're at and your thinking.
Yeah, so I'm as I said, in my final year studying law with politics at Queen's. But I'm also the press officer for the Newry and Armagh branch of the Democratic Unionist Party Association. In between my studies and volunteering in church, I also work for a member of parliament. I first got involved in politics through helping my MLA out canvassing on the doors. Quite unexpectedly, he just asked one day, could I help him out? He was lacking with help that day, and I said, I'll give you a hand, because he had done some stuff for us in the past. So that's how I got involved. From 2021 to 2023, I was a member of the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly. So the Youth Assembly is a group of 90 people, which reflects the Northern Ireland Assembly as it is, from right across every background and every age group, and they produce a number of committees to focus on specific issues that affect young people, such as education, health, environment, and social issues. So I was a member of the Environment Committee, and our focus was on a range of issues, specifically though to do with the recent Climate Change Act 2022. We analysed the range of issues and financial problems, serious financial problems with that piece of legislation. I'm also an alum of the Washington Ireland programme, class of 2023. This is a programme cross-border initiative which aims to inspire and develop promising leaders through programmes of personal development, policy debate, and community service. So that is, and actually just a side note on that, we now have our Deputy First Minister, Emilia Pengelly, and our Taoiseach, and the Republic of Ireland's Taoiseach, who are both Washington Ireland alums. So when Harold asked me to speak about my hopes and ambitions for the future, it reminded me of the time someone asked, what is Unionism's vision for Northern Ireland? Because nationalism's vision is clear, to unite the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Yet there appears to be some weaknesses, in my view, in terms of disagreements, in terms of how that might look in terms of governance, infrastructure, health, education, and there just appears to be at the moment, there may be to come, but significant details lacking on that front. But nationalism does say that we need to bring unionism, and not everybody says this, some people say the conversation, but some people do say that we need to bring unionism into the planning for a united Ireland. But for my part, it's for nationalism to convince unionism that their interests are better served in a united Ireland, something that by and large at the minute that hasn't happened. But to simply unite our two nations without convincing at least a proportion of unionism would, in my view, be very dangerous, and would also renounce on the amount of work that you guys have put in to getting peace on this island to this point in time. But for many, unionism's vision is simply the status quo. But for me, it's much, much more than that. Unionism's role is to promote a positive vision for Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. This, crucially, must transcend all communities and all backgrounds, to go out into the world and promote Northern Ireland as an excellent place to live, work and invest. An excellent education system which enables our young people to have the skills they need for the future. But importantly, we need a stable power sharing executive and assembly, because devolution is the only show in town. But many ask how we now rebuild trust after several political impasses. So for me, firstly, we need to make sure that the issues that matter to people are dealt with, whether that's, and I'm sure many of you have experienced the waiting lists that have kept going up over the years, or putting capital investment into our education system to create a skilled workforce for the future. These are the issues that people really care about, and regardless of their race, their culture or their background. But most of these issues require investment, and that's why it's really important that we make sure that we're properly funded as a nation of the UK. But hard decisions will need to be made by the Northern Ireland Executive, and that is something that previous executives have shied away from. The Bengoa reforms, which for those in the Republic of Ireland that are not maybe sure what that is, that's a major report that was published on how we make health better here in Northern Ireland. And also the recently released Independent Review of Education, which I took part in as part of the Youth Assembly. Some of these decisions won't be popular and may cause damage in the short term, but they are necessary if we're to improve our public services. So just to conclude, unionism should not shy away from the conversation about the constitutional future of Northern Ireland, but neither it should consume our everyday lives. It is not for me to say what path that nationalism should make going forward, but my focus is ensuring that we are delivering for people here in this region. Most people in Northern Ireland want this place to work. This is unionism's job, and we must deliver it. And also, sorry, I just wrote in, thank you for also your contribution to peace on this island, because that is vitally important. So thank you very much.
I think we should give those young people a little bit of applause. We can't hear you all clapping, but we can see you clapping. Thank you very much indeed. I found both of those contributions to be very challenging and also hugely encouraging. If they are reflecting a new generation of young people from across this community, gosh, that gives us reason for confidence, doesn't it? But now let's have the conversation. And is that the way, Ian, Alan, that we would like to take it forward? Alan, would you invite people to contribute? We're not.
Sorry, Harold. I was under the impression you were going to do that.
Well,
but because I don't see hands go up and things like that, whereas Ian beside you has the overall picture.
Yeah.
But let me start by thanking our two guests for putting forward some thoughts that I must confess I've never had, and have never heard before that. I am particularly impressed by the unionist view as expressed, and I look forward to hearing more in the next hour or so.
Well, who's got a question or comment?
Shirley has a question, I think.
Can we get everybody?
Thank you both very much. I know it takes a lot of courage to come on to something like this. So thank you both for contributing. I grew up in Northern Ireland in the outskirts of Belfast. I was brought up in the Presbyterian church there. I've since moved to Dunleary. But when our generation grew up in Belfast, we lived in segregated areas. We went to segregated schools. We took part in segregated sports. And I'm just wondering, has there been an opportunity for the young adults? So whenever you were growing up, are you still living in those segregated communities, or have you had opportunities to, apart from university, it's only when you went to university that you kind of moved outside the segregated areas? Have you been able to meet other people from different backgrounds when you were growing up?
Chloe.
Well, I obviously South Armagh is a very sort of nationalist place, so growing up in my own area, no. But I used to go on holidays to Lanzarote every year, and every year I would see somebody at the pool, and my mom would say, "Here, take €1 and go and ask them to play a game of pool with you." So I would be like, "Oh my God, I'm so nervous," whatever. And I would go over and ask them for the game of pool, and then there we go, making friends. And most of the time, my friends were English, and they came from kind of a Protestant background. Now, as a child, yes, I was playing with these people, but there was never any, sort of, my parents never said anything. There was never, "You're not hanging out with them because they're from an English background," or anything like that. It was just simple kids having fun, to be honest. So maybe when I was on holidays, it was sort of maybe, we weren't in Ireland. There was no sort of stereotype or anything like that. It was just plain and simple kids having fun. I obviously can't speak from maybe children growing up in Belfast or anything like that. But then I didn't get to really meet anybody from a different background until I was 17, just before I went to university. I was kind of involved in youth forums when I was in 6th and 7th year of my of school. So no, I didn't really meet anybody from any other background really here until I was much older. So
Right. Andrew, what is your experience?
Yeah, so Shirley, whenever I was in Portadown College in County Armagh, I took part in, and it was a wider school thing. Anybody that wanted to take part could. It was called Politics in Action. It's an excellent program. It operates in Northern Ireland, and it brings together two schools from completely different backgrounds. So we were paired up with St Dominic's in Belfast. And we were brought on several trips, both in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, to engage with each other, to talk with each other, and to build up friendships. And those friendships still remain today. And I also welcome the new shared education campus that has just opened in Omagh, and I think that's really, really welcome. But also, I do think it's important that integration should just happen it should just be taken. So these programs are great at initiating, but it shouldn't be at the detriment of anybody. So obviously there's so many education systems in Northern Ireland at the minute, and there should be one, but there isn't, and that's the reality. And we need to make sure that integration happens, but it happens with everybody involved pushing towards integration.
Yeah. So,
Colin has a question.
sorry,
Colin.
Colin. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a Downpatrick boy. Largely nationalist community, Protestant living in national Presbyterian, like you, Jonathan. but now rather dissenting and so forth. But I'm also from a north-south family, and I think that makes a huge difference. It makes a difference in relation to awareness. And I'm just wondering, now this is going to be a sort of a question of you both. I identify as Irish. The Belfast Agreement. I do a certain amount of work, very minimal work with the John and Pat Human Peace Foundation and community dialogue and so forth. But I'm just wondering whether you, Chloe and Jonathan,
Andrew,
how much you are aware of other communities in Northern Ireland. But there are other communities as well. I mean, I do a lot of work with refugees and asylum seekers, minority ethnic people, and these will be our future as we become more global within Ireland. And I think the dynamics are going to change radically in the next 15, 20 years. So I'm just wondering how much you are aware of the other when you're dealing with this particular thorny problem of what shape will Ireland be in say 10 years' time.
Not just Catholic, Protestant, Unionist, Nationalist.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's completely right. I mean, I think we on the Shared Island Youth Forum, we have people that live here, but they're not, they're from different backgrounds, they come from different places. All of that is in this island, and that is exactly sort of one thing that I knew, that a United Ireland, for me, that's what it's about. It's about all of the people on this island. It's not just, I don't think now, the conversation isn't as black and white as two communities. It's so diverse. It's so many people. It's so many personalities. It's I made a speech there a couple of weeks ago about a Rubik's Cube, and it was about my journey and about kind of the complexities of life. And I think that here we are complex, and all of those colors on that Rubik's Cube represent all of the backgrounds and all of the people here. So I definitely would say that, no, I'm definitely aware of people from the South not having, that maybe experience or that kind of understanding that people here, young people here do, because I know that when we're on the Shared Island Youth Forum, when the young people from the South ask us about here, they don't have a clue. Most of them are like, I'm so interested, I don't really know about the North, I don't really understand. And it's so funny because we're like, how do you not know? I live like 5 minutes across the border from you and you don't know as much about this place as me. It's surprising, but no, I definitely do.
It's interesting because in other countries, the influx of people from other cultures and countries has divided people and has made people very defensive. And you're suggesting, somebody's suggesting that will actually help us to open up and be less concerned about ourselves and more open towards others. One would like to think that would be the case, rather than as in other places where it has driven people back into themselves in defense of their own territory. Andrew?
Yeah, so I think you sort of asked the question about how I sort of identify, or how we identify, and then how we then encourage and welcome in new communities into Northern Ireland. So for me, I'm a unionist living in Northern Ireland on the island of Ireland. So I think each of those little identities is simple and it goes all together to make one. One part isn't more important than any other part, and I think that's important to note. But in terms of when people come in and welcoming new communities in, I know from my own perspective, living in Loughgall and County Armagh, it's a big apple country, and we welcome in a number of foreign internationals from especially Eastern Europe to provide jobs every summer for apples and things like that. But I think it's also, and in my work, I also help foreign internationals coming in. So it's happening, and that's great to see, and it's great to welcome people in. And I think that has been recognised by my party through the fact that we now have a spokesperson for young people and new communities. And I think Deborah Erskine, and she's the MLA for Fermanagh and South Tyrone. So I think that's really important that we recognise that there is now more than two communities, and in fact three, people who feel both Irish, British, and other.
I like the Rubik Cube image. We're no longer orange and green, we're black and white and brown and all sorts of colours. Next question from somebody.
Helen has a question for you, and Gordon.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Chloe and Andrew, you're both obviously very involved in your own communities and life in Northern Ireland, and you're both making very positive contributions. And you both obviously decided when you were 18 that you wanted to continue your studying here and stay on. I just wondered what your experience with your peers has been. Did many of them want to leave Northern Ireland when they finished at school? And how positive have they been about the future here?
I'm sorry if I keep going first. I just assumed because that's the way it was going, I'm just gonna do this. So sorry, Andrew, if I'm just completely cutting in on you. I'm not doing that. But I think that, so I think this is a really good question, because nearly a lot of my friends outside of these forums that I'm in don't speak to me about politics, Chloe. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
It's either over a drink that it's kind of spoken about, or you're wrecking my head with that. I don't want to listen to it. I don't vote. None of that. And that really surprised me. And I think that's why when I was kind of growing up, I had to kind of search elsewhere. Like I had to go into Newry, because I'm from a wee small village called Mullaban, and had to kind of go to Newry and go to other places to find politics, to get into those conversations. So no, and that's kind of saddens my heart a wee bit, just because I'm just so passionate for making this island, this shared space, the North and the South, a place for young people potential to just absolutely flow, because I think that through my education I struggled so much, and I have so much compassion for young people. So it would just break my heart to see young people so despairing here, just giving up on the politics. And I know that's not all young people, but I think just from maybe my background, I was surprised when I entered those rooms where young people were so activism, because from my small net of friends and stuff, that wasn't ever really something. So I definitely think young people need to inspire other young people to say, no, let's not give up on our country. Let's do something to make a change. And actually, before I started at Queen's, I didn't want to go here. I wanted to completely get out of the North, get out of here, wanted to go as far away as I could. But then things kind of happened, and I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. If I really don't like university, I can drop out, and it's not going to be the end of the world. And then when I started to get into politics and people started asking me to speak, I decided that no, why would I want to leave here when I can do something positive? Why would I do that? Why do I want to make other places better when this is my home, and this is a lot of people's home, even from any other background? And I think no matter what background you come from, if you want to make a good change for the people living here, no matter what their background is, that's the most important thing. And I think people can work together even if they come from different backgrounds. And I think that's what our government now are starting to very slowly sort of do. And I can kind of see it through different things. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah, so Helen, yeah, I definitely think it is really, really disappointing to see so many young people finding their futures outside Northern Ireland. I think that's really sad. But let's do something about it, and I think that's the most important thing. And the only way to do that is to grow our economy. And I'm glad that the issues that were outstanding have hopefully now been resolved, and that we can have access to new markets to help grow the economy, and ultimately then young people will feel like they have a future to live here in Northern Ireland. And yeah, that there's certain things, I mean, in Scotland, obviously, that there's less tuition fees and things like that. So there's definitely work that needs to be done in making sure that this place in Northern Ireland for young people is the best option basically for them. Whereas this, I feel at the present moment, they're feeling their future is best served elsewhere.
Thank you. We're lucky we have people like the two of you who do stay and try to make things better, and we need more like you.
You're here.
Gordon Kennedy, quick question, I think, comment?
Thank you, and thank you to Chloe and Andrew. With Andrew, I've just been discovering things in common. We're both political activists. I also went to Portadown College. So my travels took me as far as Oman and Arabia, so I've been about. But what I would like to hear your comments, and I think Andrew was the one who mentioned that we're actually now 3 communities, because there's a large centre block denominated as other, which isn't very polite, perhaps, but nonetheless, there are lots of people who don't identify as being part of either a unionist or a nationalist community, or a church community, it has to be said as well. But one of the issues in relation to education is that we can't afford to have so many different educational systems, which all require huge amounts of infrastructure. So as possible, a starting point, could I suggest that many villages will end up having 2 schools in which neither school is able to actually achieve the decent amount of numbers to allow it to exist, and will end up having to go to travel miles to another village. What about integrating our primary education, and certainly particularly in villages where it's far more natural to be working together in a single small community? Would that make sense to you folks?
Sorry?
I completely agree. I think that integrated education is so important, and that I just get mad. It just boils my blood every time that I see the statistics of how low it is. And for me, coming from a school that was not integrated at all, it was completely Catholic, like nationalist, Republican background, like there was no education there. And I completely agree that it should be from primary school. I've always said, in anything I've ever wanted to do in educational reform, like for example meditation and more things to do with life skills, I always think those things need to come in through primary school. I think that the younger we kind of make these positive changes, the easier it is for our young people when they come to secondary school to be just more, maybe I'd say understanding is the word I'm going to use of integrated education, just because I obviously come from, I would have went to a school that was, so, nationalist, that, and there is a sense of uncomfortability with, on either side, like somewhere that's quite unionist, and then whereas I'd be somewhere that's quite nationalist. Like there is going to be a sense of discomfort when it comes to integrated education, but I don't think discomfort is a bad thing. I think that's a place where people can change themselves and change their mindsets, and I think sometimes we need to get into an uncomfortable space to make space for something even better. So I would definitely say I 100% agree with what you were saying.
How do you feel, Andrew?
Yeah, so I think your first question was about this other category that's in Northern Ireland. I think there's a significant portion of other that does feel unionist, but they're disengaged with political unionism because they've seen where political unionism has been in the past, and in many ways where they are now. But I think it's my job as a unionist to bring that community back into feeling that unionism is a place where they can feel welcome, and therefore their interest is better served within the union and within the union as it stands. I think a big problem for the other category is, in many ways, their vision is the same as unionism's, in that they're basically, by abstaining from the conversation, they're promoting the status quo. And that's, I think, why they attract a lot of unionism, because it is a status quo. But the problem is, if we stay the status quo, we don't move forward. So I think that's the job of unionism, to make sure. I'm a confident unionist. I know that I want to promote Northern Ireland within the UK. I have a vision that I want to take forward, and I think we need to go out and sell that to the other category who feel that they can be convinced. And I think that other category is going to be really, really important when it comes to any vote that may happen in the future. And in your second question with regards to the education systems, yeah, there's no doubt there's too many education systems, and in that, then it's inefficient and it creates inefficiency. I would encourage you to have a wee bit of look into the Independent Review of Education that was published just very recently, a few months ago. It made a number of recommendations in terms of shared and integrated education, which are very encouraging. So I would recommend looking into that. I would agree with the vast majority of things that are in that report.
Well, alongside integrated education, I think we have to talk about integrated housing. So many of our communities are segregated, and how young people growing up together, as well as going to school together, would be something that we should aspire towards. But we still tend generally to live in our own silos. Another question from somebody. I see Ian have you got a problem with our power? We're losing our power. So give Ian a moment to repower us. Just when we're waiting for Ian to plug us in there, could I ask something of you, Andrew, in particular, because you keep talking about, and understandably, the importance of promoting the union. I was interested to hear you say that we shouldn't shy away from this conversation. And now there is a view within sort of Protestant, Unionist, Loyalist communities that to even discuss the possibility of a united Ireland is to surrender, is to to concede that the possibility that they don't want to think about. Have you any comment on that? I mean, you seem to be indicating we should get engaged in this conversation.
Yeah, well, what I mean by that is we shouldn't shy away from it in the sense that if somebody brings it up, we should very much argue and be prepared to argue our point of view. But I think in terms of the specific language around a conversation and planning, and I think those two things are very, very different. I think if we're planning for constitutional change, then the outcome is definite, and I think that a united Ireland is far from inevitable, and I think that's something that I wouldn't want to be involved in planning. But definitely, if somebody brings it up, I think unionism needs to be prepared to put their point of view across.
Right. Anybody else got a view on that, or anything else that you'd like to bring up with Andrew and Chloe? Are we back online, Ian?
May, may I ask a question from Bristol?
Who's that?
Who's speaking?
This is James Wishart, Harold.
All right. Hello,
Hello.
James Wishart. Yes, great to see you, James.
Heard of that, yeah.
Lovely to see you
Thank you.
from Bristol.
Thank you very much to Andrew and Chloe. We admire your courage and your attitude, and thank you very much. In a sense, my question follows on from Harold's comment just now. We know that the constitutional position is that if there was a referendum and if more than 50% of the people voted for unification, then that might well happen. Those of us who are quite old and have witnessed the Troubles have an anxiety that if those events were to happen, that there would be a risk of renewed violence. And therefore, my question is, what conditions do you think would be required to prevent violence erupting again?
Well, that is one challenging question, is what I'm going to say. Woo! I can feel the sweat. Oh my God, how am I going to answer this? No, I do think that I completely see that, and I've completely asked myself the same question. I mean, I think that's something that some people might forget, is that coming from a nationalist background, is that, you know, I have so much, I'm going to say maybe compassion for everybody that lives on this island. And I am a very big advocate for making every person on this island feel as comfortable as they can in whatever shape or form that this island comes to. And I think, and that what I am very strong about is that, for me, unionists, I can't speak on any of their behalf or anything like that. If it was me, if I was a politician when that sort of came along and for talk's sake, a United Ireland did happen, I would 100% make sure that unionists had a seat at the table, because at the end of the day, they do live here and they have just as much as right to say what happens on this island, because for me, in my vision, it's a new island of Ireland. It's not what it used to be before it was colonialized. It's not like that. It's something brand new. And I think that's something that's exciting and creative. And for me, I wouldn't see it cutting from the UK and the United Kingdom. Now, I can say that on my half. I'm not saying that for anybody else, but I do definitely think that in that condition, unionists will have a say in what happens here, and that shouldn't be. And I would stand up to any nationalist that say that would be a problem, because I don't think it would be. So, in terms of the violence, I think that violence happens anywhere. I mean, I think we can see in Dublin that there was a violence outbreak. I think that violence happens all the time, and I know it's going to be for a different reason. But I do think that the people here know how much the Troubles hurt. And I think the older generation know that more than we do, but we're a generation that doesn't like violence. So, well, doesn't like it, but I mean, we advocate for everything against it in our power, I think, personally. So I would hope that we are strong enough to know that we would never want to go back there, but I obviously can't speak on if that would ever happen. So I hope that made sense. If I answered your question kind of backwards there, but I hope that made some sense.
Thank you.
I think your statement there that we don't want to go back there, and that's certainly true of our generation, and I think the vast majority on this island and in this province. But the concern is that there might be some people who would feel they had to go back to the old ways to either promote or to defend. Let's hope that you represent a generation which is saying, no, that's not the answer, and it's not the way forward. Another question or comment?
I'll just jump in on that.
Yeah, please do.
The law is what it is. It's at the minute, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement says it's 50% plus one is the condition, and that is conditions. But I think whenever it brought back, whenever you said the question, it brought back a memory of whenever I was out canvassing. I think it was in Portadown. We were out in, I think it was the rectory, or a very loyalist area anyway. Maybe it was Brownstown actually. And we were out in the area, and there was a guy building a bonfire, and I was talking to him, and I says, "Are you registered to vote?" Because I had the leaflets in hand. "Are you registered to vote?" And says, "I am not registered to vote." And he says, "Well, how are you meant to have your say if you're not registered to vote?" And I said, "Well, if there's a United Ireland, I'll take up a gun." And I just says, "No, that's not. This is the only way to have your say." And I think that shocked me a wee bit, because I didn't think that attitude was still about, but that is the attitude in some loyalist areas. And we have to make sure that that doesn't happen again. But I think a way of doing that is making sure that if that is the direction that nationalism wants to go in, I think it is important that they do engage with the loyalist community, but also take note that maybe that's not the best way forward. So I think.
Any response to that or comment on what Andrew just said?
Yes. Gordon wants to come back.
Gordon?
Yes, I think it's vital that the whole aspect of what it actually involves to become part of the island of Ireland politically. We're so used in the north to having decisions decided, of course, at Westminster. We mostly disagree with them, and it's quite remarkable, really, how often the Unionist family struggle with decisions taken in Westminster, but are still determined that that's where they belong, and that's fine. In relation to any new referendum, we all must know the position of both governments in relation to how everything is funded. We need to know how everything is going to function, where the pensions and all the other matters which come through Westminster, well, is that going to bankrupt the Irish Exchequer? We're very good in Northern Ireland at absorbing money. Sadly, we're not so good at efficiency. But I certainly think that there has to be very deep conversations on what the whole business really means before any vote is even considered. Thank you.
There's
Richard, do you want to speak?
You're on mute, Richard.
Yeah. Am I coming through? Yeah.
Yes.
Make a comment and get David and Chloe's response to it. I'll start with language. We talk about a united Ireland, and that's an okay phrase, but actually, if I really think about it, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. It's like pushing two parts together. And I wonder if we need more than politics. We need a new imagination. I remember a number of years ago, I was asked to speak. It was in Canada in my early years about Ireland. I didn't know all that much, but I remember trying to do a little bit of history. And I talked about I knew the Abbey Theatre and all of that, so I talked about the literary tradition in Ireland and all the great writers in Ireland, and so waxed very lyrical about that. And then, having grown up in Belfast, I was able to speak about the shipyards, the rope works. It went on and on, the marvelous industry that there was in the north. And now remember, I would have been in my late 20s probably, just talking about Ireland, and I knew very little, but I knew that much. And I found myself saying, what a pity that there was no imagination really to think about bringing together the artistic culture of the South, in quotes, with the business acumen of the North, and weld those two together, we could have had a brilliant society. Now, I lived many years in Canada, most of my adult life actually, and one of the things that Canadians would want to say, I think, or many of them anyway, is that the country is enriched, not just economically or politically, but culturally, imaginatively, with the French and the English traditions going side by side. And that has helped Canada to be a country in which immigrants are made welcome. So when I think about today, I arrived back from Canada not so very long ago from a trip, and I went through Dublin Airport, and I was pleased to be able to just flash my my Irish passport and go through. And if I'd landed in Belfast, I would have flashed my British passport, and I would be deeply happy. And I'm certainly happy in London when I arrive in London to have a British passport. So what I'm saying is that I find myself not really thinking about banging the North with the South, which I think really is to invite horrible consequences. But I'm looking for, well, the philosophic word would be transcend, a political arrangement that transcends our divisions, but embraces the values that we hold strongly on both sides. Now, that is an act of the imagination. And that's a central theological virtue, by the way, central in church life, as well as political life. Anyway, Chloe, Andrew, do you have any comment on that, on the role of imagination in our future?
Chloe, you talked about a shared, the shared island, with the young people, the youth program. What was that?
Yeah. So, oh my God, I'm gonna be coming off this like these questions coming at me. Oh my God. I think what you said is.
Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button.
Is that me back? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think that when it comes to language, I think I would challenge what you said, because you said united and you said pushing, and I think that I would say united in a different perspective, because again, I would come through united in a different imagination. I think that if I bring myself back to my Rubik's Cube, I think that Ireland, I think united can be better. I think that when we work together and when we unite ourselves to make something better together, I think that's when prosperity happens. And when we think of united, we think of a nationalist win. And I don't think that anyone from a unionist background or even a nationalist background subconsciously will ever not think that. But at the same time, I do believe when you talked about sort of the industrialism of the North, and then why can't we bring that sort of then together, I think that's exactly what uniting us will bring, and I'm confident in that. But I also think that just because we're united doesn't mean that that has to take away from our identity, because I know, as being a Republican and a nationalist and a Catholic in the North here, technically Northern Ireland, that is a part of the United Kingdom, that does not take away from my Irish identity, and it will never do that. And I do believe that obviously unionists like living here, that is their identity is part of the union. But in my opinion, I don't think in a united Ireland that I would ever want them to feel like because we're united now they can't have that. And I can't speak on that, and I can't speak on Andrew's feelings on that, would never want to intrude on that. But I do think that when we talk about United Ireland, we have to have a different perspective on it. We have to have a different imagination on it. We need to share the island with each other. And maybe it's going to be the shared island of Ireland when it comes to the referendum. Maybe it's not even going to be called a United Ireland. But I do think that in United Ireland, it's a positive, it's breaking down. I said this kind of maybe at the beginning, don't really want to be sort of repeating myself maybe, but we need to break those walls in our minds and break those walls in our communities and try to come together. Now, I know that's a completely difficult challenge, and I'm never going to take away from that. And it's going to take years of groundwork and years of pushing and pulling together. But I do think that something like that is better. And I think for me, the imagination to think of Ireland and Ireland as a whole in that attitude instead of the stereotypical one that we face is something that's imaginative in itself.
Yeah.
But
Andrew, give you a moment to respond to some of those issues on unity and sharing, etc. But then I think there's a question from Eleanor Duff when she wants both of you to speak. Say something about the environmental issues.
Oh, oops.
Sorry, we're having technical problem. There we are, back again.
Yes.
Andrew.
So just, I think the very last bit that Gordon said just before, and we went to the next question, about, you know, London's place in it. And I think devolution is the only show in town, as I said. And there's no doubt that practical problems remain. But and this sort of brings in Richard's point about that word united. For me, it's making sure the United Kingdom is the best show in town, making the 4 regions leading on the world stage, leading in areas like infrastructure, defence, healthcare, free at the point of need, and a good healthcare system, I think, is vital. And it's something that really the UK is unique in that aspect, in having that system, but it needs to make sure that it works. And I think at the moment it's not working the way it should do. But also I think those, and it's part of what Richard said there about the really good qualities that the Republic has and that Northern Ireland has. And I think that's something that really came through in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and those institutions that came from that, those north-south bodies that are really about making sure that those links remain strong. And those links are very, very important. And I think as that then leads on to what Eleanor's saying, I think we share this island, and I think that's going to be very important in terms of where we go in terms of environmental policy going forward. And I think the Climate Change Act in Northern Ireland is our first sort of step towards creating a more sustainable future in terms of environmental issues. I think Lough Neagh is our biggest freshwater lake on these islands, and I think we're going to have to take some DAERA minister is going to have to take some very difficult decisions around Lough Neagh, and it's how the DAERA minister balances the interests of the agriculture sector, which is extremely important to both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, while also pushing forward with environmental initiatives.
So we've moved from talking about the political climate to the environmental issues. Chloe, are they both equally important, or can we bring those two together? Are they political?
Yeah, I think that well, I think that I would have said maybe in December that before we talk about the climate, we need to get people in Stormont who are actually going to talk to each other and then talk about climate. But I think now that we have had those people in government now, that we can start to talk about the climate. I mean, I think that it is something that is extremely important. I mean, I agree with everything that Andrew said. And I would also say that for me in school, as much as we say that young people care about the environment, which I think is completely true, at the same time, there's not enough education on it and the detriments on it. And I don't know if it's a maturity thing with some young people, but I think there's still some sense of something missing. And for me, I always believe that if we want young people to care about these things, we need to teach them these things in school. And I think I'll always come back to education because it's something I'm passionate about. We need to educate our young people on climate change. We need to encourage them on what to go out and do. We need to do so much more in our smaller communities. I think, it's okay to put all these, to try to, for politicians to debate and get these in. But when that's going through, because that takes a long time, we need to be seeing what we can do in our own communities, and we need to push for more, because although it's all we're talking about, there's people still littering. It's still happening. Like, I think there just needs to be more of a push. And I think when people talk, there's a certain passion that some people can sort of have when they speak. And I think that people that have that, like Greta Thunberg, obviously she can't come to every country and speak to every single person and get them to, the climate, things like that. But we definitely need so much more talk and for what small things people can do in their communities. Because when I go to work, I always see switches on, and we have a policy in my part-time job about climate. Like, my company, we're supposed to be, all about the climate change, all about this. Yet I go in and I see the amount of plastic that, they're taking for the clothes and all that sort of stuff. Like, the switches are being left on by people. Like, as much as we think we're talking about it, I don't think we're doing enough. So I think it's what we can do in our own communities matters just as much as policies.
Now, there's somebody, don't want to leave anybody out who's got a hand up. Is there a hand up somewhere?
Ross has a hand up.
Ross Hines.
You have to unmute, Ross. Ross, can you unmute?
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
I have a simple question for both of our speakers. Could they tell us how they would compare and contrast the North and the South.
Ooh, okay. Is there any specific like way, or is it just really broad?
No,
like...
no, this is a broad question because I'm interested in how in people's perception. So I know all about the South. I have connections in the North, but I don't know it as well. So it would be very interesting to see from both of you, particularly for me, how do you see the South? And then for others, how do you see the North? So we can see, because there's been a lot of talk about it, but we haven't actually identified, there was mention of education and so on, but it's as wide as you like to take it. No limits.
Andrew, what's your perception of the South as a unionist?
Yeah, so my perception of the South is that they obviously don't have the same, I wouldn't want to say baggage, but they don't have the same history that we have shared here in Northern Ireland, which is an advantage in that they are much more, they have a more efficient form of government, for example. They're able to form coalitions as they wish, and I think that's a problem with Northern Ireland in terms of governance. We have a power sharing system that has to work together or else it doesn't work, whereas the South, they have a much more efficient form of government, and I think that's a position that we need to move to here at some point in the very near future, hopefully. So that's one thing that is an advantage, I would say, that the Republic has over our governance system. But I think it's unique. The power sharing executive is essential here in Northern Ireland because of our background. But
would you find it an attractive place to live if your job or whatever took you there?
If my job took me there,
you fell in love with a girl from there.
like it's definitely
like I did.
Yeah, like I mean, I've traveled in the South. I visit lots of places down there, and it's a beautiful place. And we share this island. It is the whole of Ireland.
Do you feel at home when you go down there, or do you feel like you're in a foreign country?
There's no doubt that there's differences between us, and I think one thing that I learned from the Washington Ireland program, which was 30 people, but half from Northern Ireland and half from the Republic of Ireland, I did feel that especially those from rural areas in the Republic of Ireland really didn't understand Northern Ireland, and I didn't understand their perspective on things, which is a detriment to me too. But I think as I think Chloe remarked on that too, they didn't really understand Northern Ireland. They didn't really understand. Some had never met a Protestant, let alone a Unionist, let alone a DUP member. So I think that was maybe a shock to them. But yeah, so I think those North-South institutions are really, really important. And I think we share more in common in that we share the island together. And I think that's extremely important. But I think just one note from Eleanor's point of view about the environment. I think one thing that our legislation in Northern Ireland is really lacking at the minute is we have several issues around a just transition, and that's in many places that's littered throughout legislation in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. But we also have a cost of possibly £4 billion that's knitted into the legislation. I think that's a problem going forward that we'll have to face, but definitely.
So, Chloe, you lived, you can look across the border, you lived right on it almost. So you're in a position to look north and south. Do you see any huge differences or things to say for one that wouldn't say for the other?
Yeah, well, I kind of say, although like I would, when Andrew was saying that they'd never met someone that was, Protestant or Unionist and in, that area, I think it's funny because I've met people from the south who on the shared island who immediately saw me from the north and I'm a Protestant. As soon as they met me, they were like, "Oh, we just assumed that that's," and I just started laughing because I was like, "Oh my God, like how did you sort of, how was that even, where did that even come from?" But then again, the stereotype of it. But I think that from what I see, and I can only talk from young people that I meet, there's this sense of kind of, they tend to care. Like I know a lot that would care about climate change, but they wouldn't really care about sort of, what we would care about, which is either, like staying, united with the United Kingdom or united with United Ireland. They don't see that problem. They don't really understand it, or they don't know anything about it. Like we did a session on the education system and we talked about the difference between them both, and they did not know anything about it. I sat for an hour with people from the south in my group and all we did was talk about the north, because I would know, I have a lot of cousins from the south, so I would kind of know, and friends, I would kind of know a good bit about their kind of education system. They do like a lot of subjects and all that sort of stuff. But they were so shocked that we had the transfer test and all of that, and they were like, "That's so weird. Like, why do you guys do that?" And we were like, "Well, such and such and such." So I do think that I think sometimes some people from the north, young people, we get so consumed sometimes in our own politics and our own problems that we don't know much about the south. And I think there's much I'd like much more, even though I'd be for unification. There's still much about the south that I would need to learn, and I think we need to learn from each other. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Was there somebody with a hand up there?
Well,
Emma?
I wanted to ask some question, both to Andrew and Chloe. Maybe it's been touched on before, but an option of a federal Ireland, whether that would go some way between the two of a united Ireland and between those who want to stay in the UK?
Yeah, there's a good question from a politician.
Yeah, so that federal idea is definitely one that has, I'm sure I've heard it mentioned before. I've actually heard it from one of the guys in the Washington Ireland program was a Sinn Féin member, and I had heard him. I think that's most of their policy is that idea of a federalized system. Well, some members anyway. But I think that is maybe something that we should look at if that's the direction that nationalism wants to go. But the problem with that is I think I was on the Politics in Action program, and I was talking to the Minister of Education, who was a Fine Gael representative in the South, and I asked him, Northern Ireland's block grant is, I think, I could be wrong in this, but I think it's £100 billion a year, and I asked him, will you be able to afford us? And he said no. So, I mean, read into that what you will.
Yeah, well, I think we're probably coming close to our time now, and there was I'm very tempted to ask James Wishart a question from Bristol. You come from here originally, so you've probably spent more of your life in that far country than you did here, James, when you and I went to school together. But tell me this, what would your neighbours or your friends, the people with whom you live and work and worship, what would they make of this conversation? Would they be interested? Would they care? Or what would they say?
Well, thank you, Harold. I think I'd be more or less where Chloe was a moment ago, in that I find that, you know, over the 50 years or whatever I've been here, generally the people here do not understand Northern Ireland, and only very few seem to want to.
Yes.
And I mean, if you read the British press, you will get the impression that at least there's a sizable group of people who would be quite happy to see Northern Ireland off their hands. So, in fact, I have just this morning finished writing a piece about Corrymeela, Harold, for a local group of people here, on the assumption that they really know very little about the background or very little about the detail, obviously, of Corrymeela. I wouldn't expect that, but it's even the background. So, however, I think there have been a series of leading politicians here who have taken a very positive interest, beginning with John Major and continuing with Tony Blair. And indeed, the present Prime Minister, I think, has taken a very positive interest and made real contributions to issues related to Northern Ireland, the consequent upon Brexit. So I'm hopeful that at that level there would be continued positive interest.
So I think what probably you're saying is that the people across the other island would be happy to see us sort out our problems. Leave it to
One minute for Andrew
another
and Chloe.
generation. Andrew and Chloe, a minute each to conclude.
Yes, so I actually on this was talking to somebody who lived previously in Northern Ireland but moved to Luton in England, and I asked her, why is Northern Ireland not really mentioned much in England? You know, do they really care about us? And I says to her, yes, they it's on their radar, they do care, but we have to consider that it doesn't affect them. Like, we don't sit here and say, oh, do you know what really concerns me? London knife crime. That really gets to me. You know, for them, they care about issues that affect them, and we care about issues that affect us. And we're not the center of the universe. We shouldn't always think that everybody should be talking about us all the time. So I think in that sense, it really was something for me that I'd never really thought about before. You know, she lived in London at the time, and she voted for the Labour Party. And because at that time there was big social issues, London there still is, but she voted for the Labour Party, and the people here, her family members, were like, why are you doing that? But for them, it was social issues in London, and that was the party for her. So I think that it's important to note that we all have our own interests, and we shouldn't necessarily expect others to care about us before themselves.
Chloe.
I would just sort of say that thanks very much for having us, but I would also say that here is changing, the North is changing. We've got our first ever nationalist First Minister, so things here are changing, is sort of one thing I would say. And I would hope, and I wouldn't talk on, you know, on unionists and their opinion, but I would hope that that doesn't frighten them, and I would never want it to. But I would also say that although me and Andrew do come from different backgrounds and might have different sort of perspectives on whether we are united or not, I do think that we have a very similar idea on issues like climate change and the sort of benefits of living here and making living on this island a prosperous place. And I think that that's something that is very important to take away from this conversation. We come from different backgrounds, but we still want to make this place the best it can be. So that's what I would like to